In the vastness of the Nevada desert, where heat ripples dance across ancient lake beds and mountains cast long shadows under an unforgiving sun, there exists a silence that feels almost deliberate. It's the kind of quiet that makes you wonder what might be hidden just beyond the next ridge, buried beneath the next sand dune, or concealed within the next fortified fence line. This is a story about secrets, not the small, personal kind we all carry, but the enormous, world-altering variety, the kind that governments guard with layers of classification, misdirection, and plausible deniability. The kind that, if true, would rewrite everything we think we know about our place in the cosmos. In 1997, a man sat down for an interview that most people never saw. His name was Bob Lazar. By then, he had already become infamous in certain circles, lauded by some as a whistleblower of cosmic proportions, dismissed by others as an elaborate hoaxer. But on that day, in a setting far removed from the glare of major media, he spoke with a candor that was both casual and chilling. What follows is not simply a retelling of that conversation. It's an exploration of the mysteries within mysteries, the questions that spiral outward from a single claim that somewhere in the Nevada desert, the United States government has been reverse engineering technology not of this world. Whether you believe that claim or not, the journey ahead will take you through layers of intrigue, scientific possibility, historical context, and human drama. We'll walk through the corridors of classified facilities, stand beneath craft that defy conventional physics, and confront the uncomfortable possibility that we are not alone and that someone has known this for decades. So settle in, turn down the lights, let the outside world fade away, because we're about to descend into one of the most enduring mysteries of our time. Chapter 1. The desert that hides more than science. Nevada desert is a landscape of contradictions. To the casual observer driving along Highway 375, the road locals have nicknamed the extraterrestrial highway, it appears empty, almost lunar in its desolation. But appearances can be deceiving. Beneath that apparently lifeless expanse lies one of the most secure and secretive military testing zones on Earth. Area 51, officially known as Groom Lake, has been the subject of speculation, conspiracy theories, and genuine historical significance since its creation in the 1950s. Here, during the Cold War, America developed its most advanced reconnaissance aircraft, the U-2 spy plane, the SR-71 Blackbird, the F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighter. These weren't myths. These were real machines, pushing the boundaries of aeronautics and materials science. For years, they flew in absolute secrecy. Witnesses who reported strange lights in the sky, craft moving at impossible speeds, or shapes that didn't match any known aircraft were dismissed, sometimes ridiculed. Then, decades later, the aircraft were declassified, and suddenly those crazy reports made perfect sense. This historical pattern raises an uncomfortable question. What if it's happening again? According to Bob Lazar, Area 51 itself was never the main story. The real secret, he claimed, lay further south at a location he called S4, built into the side of Papoose Mountain, approximately 15 miles from Groom Lake, while Area 51 tested advanced human technology. S4 allegedly housed something far more exotic, craft of non-human origin, retrieved from circumstances unknown, studied by a team of scientists and engineers working under layers of security so tight that their work was invisible even to most of the military. Complex, it sounds like science fiction, and yet Lazar's description of his journey to this facility. His work there and what he witnessed contains details that are either the product of an extraordinarily creative imagination or the testimony of someone who genuinely saw something extraordinary. The question isn't simply whether we believe him. The question is, what would it mean if even a fraction of his account were true? Bob Lazar didn't set out to become a controversial figure. By his own account, he was a physicist with a conventional skepticism about UFOs. He considered the entire subject the domain of cranks and conspiracy theorists. He worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico, one of America's premier scientific institutions, birthplace of the atomic bomb, home to cutting-edge research in nuclear physics and materials science. Then, in 1988, his life took an unexpected turn. He was contacted about a position involving advanced propulsion systems. The details were vague, the security clearances extensive, but the opportunity intriguing. He accepted what followed, if his account is accurate, was a descent into a world where the impossible became routine, where the boundaries of known science were not just pushed but shattered, and where the most profound secret in human history was guarded by a bureaucracy that would stop at nothing to maintain its silence. But before we go further into his claims, we need to understand the landscape, both physical and psychological, that makes such a story even conceivable. The Nevada Test and Training Range covers approximately 4,531 square miles. It's larger than some countries. Within its boundaries, the military conducts exercises, tests, weapons, and operates facilities that remain classified to this day. The airspace above is restricted. Unauthorized entry onto the grounds is met with swift response from armed security personnel, sometimes called camo dudes, by UFO watchers who maintain vigil along the perimeter. This isn't paranoia. This is national security infrastructure, built during an era when America's technological edge was the only thing standing between Western democracy and Soviet domination. The secrecy was real. The compartmentalization was necessary. And the technology developed here: stealth coating, advanced radar systems, experimental propulsion represented billions of dollars in research and gave the United States military capabilities that adversaries couldn't match. But here's where the story gets strange. Over the decades, locals, military personnel, and commercial pilots have reported phenomena in the skies above. This restricted zone that don't fit the profile of conventional aircraft. Lights moving at speeds that would tear apart any known vehicle. Objects making right-angled turns at velocities that would subject any pilot to fatal craft hovering silently, then accelerating to hypersonic speeds in seconds. Some of these reports were undoubtedly sightings of classified military projects. The F-117, before its public reveal, would have looked otherworldly to anyone unfamiliar with stealth technology. But not all reports fit that explanation. Some described behaviors that seemed to violate physics as we understand it. And that brings us back to Bob Lazar in the interview from 1997. Lazar spoke with a matter-of-fact tone that was almost unsettling. There was no hysteria, no dramatic embellishment. He described his experiences at S for the way an engineer might describe working on any complex system, technical, detailed, occasionally frustrated by the limitations of language to convey what he'd witnessed. He spoke of entering a hangar built into the mountainside, designed to be invisible from satellite reconnaissance. He described seeing craft, not one, but 9, stored in separate bays. The one he worked on, which he nicknamed the Sport Model, was approximately 52 feet in diameter disc-shaped, with a smooth, seamless exterior that showed no visible rivets, welds, or fasteners. It looked, he said, as if it had been molded from a single piece of material inside. The architecture was alien in the most literal sense. The ceilings were low. An adult human had to crouch to move through most of the interior. The seats were small, clearly designed for beings no taller than 3 or 4 feet. There were 3 levels: a middle deck with the crew area, a lower level containing what he identified as waveguide emitters for the propulsion system, and an upper level he believed housed navigation equipment. At the center of it all was a reactor. Small, no larger than a basketball, but allegedly capable of producing more power than a conventional nuclear power plant. The fuel, an element that doesn't exist in nature on Earth. Element 115. Now, here's where we need to pause and examine what Lazar claimed about this element, because it touches on real science in ways that are both fascinating and problematic. Chapter 2. The Island of Esther Bi Light. To understand Lazar's claim about element 115, we need a brief journey into nuclear physics and the periodic table. Every element is defined by the number of protons in its nucleus. Hydrogen has 1, helium has 2, and so on up the table. As you add more protons, elements generally become heavier and more unstable. By the time you reach elements like plutonium 94 protons or americium 95 protons, you're dealing with materials that decay, sometimes very rapidly. Scientists have created heavier elements in particle accelerators, fleeting, synthetic creations that exist for fractions of a second before disintegrating. Element 115, which scientists later named moscovium, was first synthesized in 2003 by researchers in Russia and confirmed in subsequent experiments. It is indeed highly unstable, with the longest-lived isotope having a half-life of less than a second. But here's the intriguing part. Nuclear physicists have long theorized about an island of stability, a region in the periodic table where certain superheavy elements, with very specific numbers of protons and neutrons, might be stable or at least relatively light. Think of it as a sweet spot in nuclear architecture, where the forces holding the nucleus together achieve a kind of balance. When Lazar first made his claims in 1989, element 115 had not been synthesized yet. He described it as a stable element with unusual gravitational properties, specifically that it generated a gravitational field that extended beyond the atomic nucleus in ways that defied conventional understanding. Was this remarkable foresight a lucky guess, or evidence that he had encountered something real? Skeptics point out that the element 115 created in laboratories doesn't match Lazar's description. It's unstable and shows no gravitational anomalies. Supporters counter that Lazar was describing a specific isotope, perhaps one with a particular configuration of neutrons that hasn't been synthesized on Earth but might exist elsewhere in the universe where different stellar processes create heavier elements. The truth, we don't know. And that uncertainty is part of what makes this story so compelling. Music shifts, more technical, almost mechanical. Lazar described the reactor in technical detail. The element 115 would be bombarded with protons in a device resembling a small particle accelerator. This process would transmute it briefly into element 116, releasing antimatter in the process, specifically antihydrogen. Antimatter is real. It's not science fiction. Physicists create tiny amounts of it in facilities like CERN. When antimatter encounters regular matter, They annihilate each other in a reaction that converts mass directly into energy with near-perfect efficiency. Einstein's equation, E equals mc, describes this process. A tiny amount of mass releases enormous energy. According to Lazar, this antimatter was directed into a reaction chamber, where it met a gaseous matter target. The resulting annihilation produced tremendous heat, which was converted into electricity using something called a thermionic generator, a real technology used in some spacecraft, though nothing on Earth approaches the efficiency Lazar described. But the reactor didn't just produce power. According to Lazar, the element 115 itself generated a gravitational field as a byproduct of its nuclear structure. This field could be amplified and directed, creating the propulsion system for the craft. It's here that Lazar's account ventures into territory that challenges our understanding of physics. Gravity, as we understand it, is the weakest of the four fundamental forces. It's what keeps planets in orbit and holds galaxies together. But at the atomic scale, it's almost negligible compared to electromagnetic and nuclear forces. We can observe gravity, measure it, predict it with extraordinary accuracy, but we don't fully understand its mechanism at the quantum level. We can't create it artificially. We certainly can't manipulate it. Or can we? General relativity tells us that massive objects bend space-time, creating what we perceive as gravitational attraction. The more massive the object, the greater the curvature. But Einstein's equations also allow for the possibility of gravitational waves, ripples, in space-time itself. Traveling at the speed of light in 2015, the LIGO Observatory detected gravitational waves for the first time, confirming a prediction Einstein made a century earlier. These waves were generated by the collision of two black holes over 1 billion light-years away. The energy involved was almost incomprehensible. Lazar claimed the craft at S4 could generate and direct gravitational waves using the amplified field from element 115. 3 gravity amplifiers arranged around the reactor would focus and project these waves through devices he called waveguides, analogous to how microwave energy is transmitted through hollow pipes. By directing these gravitational waves, the craft could bend space-time around itself. It wouldn't push against the air or space. It would pull itself toward a destination by warping the fabric of reality. If that sounds like the Alcubierre drive, a theoretical faster-than-light propulsion system proposed by physicist Miguel Alcubierre in 1994, that's because the concepts are remarkably similar. Alcubierre's math showed that a spacecraft could theoretically travel faster than light by contracting space in front of it and expanding space behind it, all while remaining in a bubble of flat spacetime. The catch: it would require exotic matter with negative mass energy, something we've never observed and don't know how to create. Lazar was describing essentially the same concept 5 years before Alcubierre published his paper. Coincidence? Parallel thinking? Or something else? But even if such a propulsion system were possible, the engineering challenges would be staggering. The power requirements, the precision needed to manipulate gravitational fields, the materials that could withstand such forces. These are not trivial problems, and yet Lazar described witnessing a test flight. Chapter 3. The Flight That Defied PHY-Cs. Imagine standing at the threshold of an aircraft hangar carved into a mountainside. The air is cool, slightly stale, carrying the scent of electronics and something metallic you can't quite identify. Before you, in the center of the bay, sits an object that shouldn't exist. It's roughly 50 feet across, disc-shaped with a dome on top and a narrow profile. The surface is smooth, almost organically smooth, with a metallic sheen that seems to shift subtly in the light. There are no seams, no panel lines, no visible means of entry until you know where to look. This, according to Bob Lazar, was a routine sight during his time at S4, but on one particular day, the routine was broken. He was summoned to observe a test flight. The craft, his sport model, was being prepared for a low-altitude maneuver within the confines of the facility. Security was tight. Observers were positioned at specific locations. And then, with a sound he described as barely perceptible, the craft lifted from the ground. No roar of engines, no blast of exhaust, no visible means of propulsion. It simply rose, hovering several feet in the air with perfect stability. Then it moved, laterally, smoothly, as if the air itself was making way for it. After a brief demonstration, it descended and settled back onto the floor with the gentleness of a falling leaf. Lazar's description was almost clinical. He noted the silence, the stability, the precision of control. What struck him most, he said, was how different it was from any aircraft he'd ever seen. There was no sense of thrust, no visible reaction to gravitational forces. It moved as if it existed slightly outside the normal rules of physics, from a greater distance, approximately 10 miles away. According to his account, he witnessed more dramatic maneuvers. The craft would accelerate to speeds that seemed impossible, make instantaneous changes in direction that should have torn it apart, hover motionless, then vanish in a blur of motion. These weren't the movements of conventional aircraft. Fighter jets, even the most advanced, are constrained by aerodynamics and G-force. Pilots can only withstand so much acceleration before losing consciousness, or worse. The tightest turn a modern jet can make still requires hundreds of feet of radius. These craft, according to Lazar, could pivot on a point, accelerate from hover to hypersonic in seconds, all while producing that characteristic glow that countless witnesses have reported seeing in the Nevada skies. That glow, Lazar explained, was a side effect of the propulsion system. The intense gravitational field would ionize the surrounding air, creating a luminous plasma envelope around the craft. The color would change based on the power level, blue-white at low power, shifting toward orange and red at higher intensities. It's a detail that matches thousands of UFO reports going back decades. Witnesses describe glowing orbs, disks with halos of light, objects that change color as they accelerate. Are these observations of the same phenomenon Lazar described? Or is it simply that Lazar, aware of these reports, crafted his story to match them? The skeptical view would note that Lazar never provided physical evidence of these flights. No photographs, no video, no documentation. He claims the security was absolute. Cameras were forbidden, personal effects were searched, and the consequences of violating protocols were severe. Yet he later took friends to vantage points outside the restricted area, locations where they could observe the test flights from afar. These witnesses, some of whom have spoken publicly, corroborate seeing unusual aerial phenomena on the nights Lazar predicted they would occur. Does this constitute proof? No, but it adds a layer of complexity to the story. What's particularly striking is the consistency of Lazar's account over decades. Details he provided in 1989 remain unchanged in interviews years later. He doesn't embellish, doesn't add dramatic flourishes with each retelling. For someone perpetrating a hoax, that level of consistency is unusual. Most fabricated stories evolve over time, gaining details as the storytellers. Confidence grows or as they gauge audience reactions. Lazar's account has remained remarkably stable. Make of that what you will. But observing flights was only part of his role. His primary task was to understand the propulsion system, to reverse engineer it, to determine if it could be replicated using materials available on Earth. That work, he said, took him inside the craft itself. Chapter 4, Inside the IMPO Sisal Bale. There are moments in life that fundamentally alter your perception of reality. Most of us never experience them. We live within the boundaries of the expected, the explainable. The comfortable Bob Lazar described such a moment when he first entered the craft. The entry hatch was small, positioned on the side of the disc. You didn't walk in so much as crouch and shuffle, mindful of the low ceiling and the unfamiliar layout. The interior lighting was subdued, coming from sources that weren't immediately apparent. No bulbs, no fixtures, just a diffuse glow emanating from the walls themselves. The middle deck, where crew would presumably sit, was arranged around the central reactor column. 3 seats, small and oddly proportioned, molded into the floor. They weren't adjustable. They weren't padded in any human sense. They were simply there, designed for occupants much smaller than an adult human. The reaction Lazar described wasn't excitement. It wasn't wonder. It was something closer to dread, a deep, instinctive sense that he was somewhere he didn't belong, touching something that wasn't meant for human hands. This is a detail worth dwelling on because it runs counter to how most hoaxers would describe such an experience. We'd expect awe, enthusiasm, perhaps fear mixed with exhilaration. Instead, Lazar spoke of an ominous feeling, a pervasive wrongness that settled over him the moment he stepped inside. Psychologists call this the uncanny valley, that instinctive discomfort we feel when something is almost human, but not quite. It applies to robots with nearly lifelike faces, to computer-generated characters that move almost naturally. The human brain is exquisitely tuned to recognize patterns, to identify members of our species, to detect subtle deviations from the norm. What Lazar described was the spatial equivalent of that sensation. Every proportion was wrong. Every surface felt alien. Nothing was familiar, and that unfamiliarity triggered deep, primal unease. The technology itself presented immediate challenges. How do you analyze a system when you don't understand its basic operating principles? Conventional reverse engineering starts with known frameworks. You examine components, trace connections, test responses. But what if the entire paradigm is foreign? The reactor, for instance, showed no obvious input or output mechanisms, no fuel rods to insert, no cooling system, no shielding that matched anything in nuclear engineering textbooks. It simply existed, a dense object with properties that seemed to defy measurement. Lazar and his colleague, whom he identified only as Barry, were tasked with understanding the power and propulsion system. They had documentation, briefings that provided limited context, but much of their work involved educated guesses, testing, and frequent dead ends. One particularly fascinating detail: Lazar described the internal architecture as having no visible seams or fasteners. Everything appeared to be formed from single pieces or joined in ways that left no trace. It was as if the entire craft had been grown rather than assembled. This isn't entirely beyond possibility. Additive manufacturing, 3D printing, can create complex shapes without traditional fasteners. But the scale and precision Lazar described exceeded anything in contemporary manufacturing. Even today, the materials themselves were exotic. Some appeared to be metallic, but with properties that didn't match known alloys. Others seemed ceramic or crystalline. Analysis equipment gave strange readings, results that didn't fit expected parameters. Was this because the materials were genuinely alien, or because Lazar, lacking complete understanding of the test equipment, misinterpreted the data? We can't know for certain, but his descriptions contain specific technical details that suggest either genuine expertise or remarkable research. He spoke of thermionic generators, waveguides, field amplification, particle acceleration, all real concepts, but applied in configurations that don't match any known technology. The propulsion system, according to Lazar, operated in 3 modes. In Omicron mode, the craft could float, generating just enough gravitational field to counteract Earth's gravity, hovering effortlessly with no expenditure of reaction mass. In Delta configuration, it could maneuver at low speeds, tilting to direct the gravitational field, and move in any direction with precision. But the 3rd mode, Omicron configuration at full power, was where things became truly extraordinary. In this mode, all 3 gravity amplifiers focused their output in the same direction, creating an intensely warped region of space-time ahead of the craft. The craft would then fall into this distortion, effectively being pulled toward its destination. Distance became meaningless. Time dilated. The journey from one point to another happened almost instantaneously. This is why, Lazar explained, asking about the craft's top speed was a meaningless question. Speed is distance divided by time. But if you're distorting both distance and time, the equation falls apart. You're not traveling through space. You're manipulating space itself. It sounds like fantasy, and yet general relativity allows for such phenomena. Alcubierre's mathematics, published years after Lazar's claims, describe precisely this kind of space-time manipulation. NASA's Eagle Works laboratory has conducted preliminary theoretical research into similar concepts. None of this proves Lazar's account, but it demonstrates that what he described, while far beyond current capabilities, isn't fundamentally incompatible with physics as we understand it. The question remains, where would such technology come from? Chapter 5. The Zeta Reticuli Connection 32, light-years from Earth. In the constellation Reticulum, visible only from the southern hemisphere, lies a binary star system known as Zeta Reticuli, to sun-like stars, orbiting each other in a cosmic dance that has continued for billions of years. According to documentation, Lazar claimed to have read at S4. This system was the alleged origin point of the craft he worked on. Zeta Reticuli has a peculiar place in UFO lore. In the 1960s, a couple named Betty and Barney Hill reported being abducted by beings from an unidentified craft. Under hypnotic regression, Betty Hill drew a star map she claimed to have seen aboard the craft, a map showing trade routes or travel paths between stars. Years later, an amateur astronomer named Marjorie Fish created 3-dimensional models trying to match Hill's map to actual stellar configurations. She concluded that the map depicted the view from Zeta Reticuli, showing nearby stars that might have habitable planets. The Fish interpretation has been heavily criticized. Skeptics note that with enough stars and enough freedom in arrangement, you can make almost any pattern match almost any other pattern. The map might be coincidence, imagination, or subconscious reconstruction of star charts Hill had seen previously, but the connection stuck in UFO culture. Zeta Reticuli became the alleged home of the Greys, the archetypal alien beings with large heads, enormous eyes, and small bodies that appear in countless abduction accounts. When Lazar mentioned Zeta Reticuli, it immediately connected his narrative to existing UFO mythology. For skeptics, this is evidence of fabrication. He was simply incorporating familiar elements to make his story more believable to enthusiasts. For believers, it was confirmation of a wider pattern. But let's consider the logistics for a moment. 32 light-years is not a vast distance on cosmic scales, but it's enormous by any human measure. Light, traveling at 186,000 miles per second, takes 32 years to cover that span. Conventional spacecraft, even moving at a significant fraction of light speed, would require centuries for the journey, yet Lazar described the craft as small, lacking any storage for supplies, provisions, or life support for extended journeys. He called it a sport model precisely because it seemed designed for short, fast trips, like a race car, built for performance rather than comfort or endurance. If the craft truly came from Zeta Reticuli, its propulsion system must be capable of circumventing the light speed barrier, not breaking it through brute force acceleration, but bypassing it entirely through space-time manipulation. This brings us back to the Alcubierre concept. A spacecraft in an Alcubierre bubble wouldn't experience time the way we do. From the crew's perspective, the journey might take minutes or hours, regardless of the external distance covered. No need for generations of travelers. No relativistic time dilation separating crew from their home civilization. But there's another angle to consider. What if the craft didn't come from Zeta Reticuli at all? What if that information was disinformation, planted to mislead or misdirect? Intelligence agencies are experts in layered deception. During World War II, the Allies created entire phantom armies to deceive German intelligence about D-Day invasion plans. During the Cold War, both superpowers engaged in elaborate disinformation campaigns, seeding false information to confuse adversaries. If a program to study recovered alien technology existed, those running it would know that leaks were possible. Whistleblowers might emerge. Witnesses might talk. So you build in false details, breadcrumbs that lead investigators in wrong directions, make the truth harder to verify, and allow you to discredit anyone who reveals classified information by pointing to factual errors in their account. Claiming the craft came from Zeta Reticuli could serve multiple purposes. It's specific enough to sound credible, exotic enough to capture imagination, and conveniently unprovable. We have no way to visit that system, no means of confirming or denying the claim. It's the perfect disinformation detail, or it's the truth, and the implications are staggering. Zeta Reticuli's stars are roughly as old as our Sun. Planets in that system would have had similar amounts of time for life to evolve, for civilizations to develop. If intelligent life arose there, it could be at a technological level comparable to ours or far ahead. Depending on countless variables we can barely guess at, the famous Drake equation attempts to estimate the number of communicating civilizations in our galaxy by multiplying factors like star formation rates, the fraction of stars with planets, the fraction of those that could support life, and so on. The answers range wildly depending on the values you assign. But even conservative estimates suggest we shouldn't be alone. The Fermi paradox asks the obvious question. If intelligent life is common, where is everybody? Why haven't we detected signals, received visitors, found evidence of galactic civilizations? Perhaps the distances are too vast. Perhaps civilizations self-destruct before achieving interstellar travel. Perhaps advanced societies have no interest in contact with primitive worlds like ours. Or perhaps, as Lazar's account suggests, they're here. They've been here, and a select few humans know it. But knowing something and proving it are entirely different challenges. And according to Lazar, the evidence was tightly controlled, locked behind layers of security that most people would never penetrate. Yet there were cracks, and through those cracks, glimpses of something far stranger than exotic propulsion systems. Chapter 6. The Autopsy, PHOTOJ, RAPHS Samung. The briefing materials Lazar claimed to review at S4 were 2 photographs. Not of technology, not of spacecraft interiors or propulsion systems. Photographs of a body. This is where the narrative shifts from engineering mystery to something far more visceral and disturbing. Because if the craft were real, their pilots must have been real as well. And somewhere, at some point, human beings encountered them. Lazar's description was clinical, almost detached, perhaps a psychological defense against the strangeness of what he was seeing. The photographs showed a small being, child-sized, with proportions distinctly non-human. The chest had been opened in a T-incision, standard autopsy procedure, with the skin pulled back to reveal internal structures. But those structures were wrong. Where a human body contains discrete organs, heart, lungs, liver, kidneys, each with specific functions and locations, this being had a single central mass. Lazar described it as resembling a liver in color and texture, a brownish, almost liquid-looking organ that seemed to serve multiple functions. Simultaneously, the second photograph showed this organ sectioned, revealing internal differentiation. Regions that appeared to pump fluid, perhaps analogous to a heart. Sections that might process gases, functioning as lungs. Other areas whose purpose was unclear. It suggested a fundamentally different approach to biology. Human organs are discrete, specialized, with redundancy in some systems. This being's physiology was integrated, efficient in a way that didn't match any terrestrial model. Now, the obvious question, why would these photographs exist in a briefing accessible to someone working on propulsion systems? Lazar's explanation was that the various teams, working on different aspects of the project, received basic information about all elements of the program. The reasoning was that understanding the beings who created the technology might provide insights relevant to reverse engineering their craft. For instance, the low ceilings and small seats suggested pilots with specific physical dimensions. The layout of controls, the placement of systems, all reflected the physiology and cognitive patterns of non-human designers. Engineers replicating those systems needed to understand the context in which they were created. It's a plausible explanation. In human engineering, ergonomics matter enormously. Aircraft cockpits are designed around human body dimensions, reaction times, visual capabilities. Understanding the operators helps you understand the design choices, but it raises another question. Whose body was photographed? Throughout the decades of UFO research, reports of recovered bodies have surfaced repeatedly. The Roswell incident of 1947 allegedly involved the recovery of crash debris and, according to some witnesses, small humanoid bodies. Those witnesses, military personnel, mortuary workers, local residents described beings roughly 3 to 4 feet tall, with large heads and large eyes. Their descriptions match the archetypal grey that has become ubiquitous in popular culture. But here's the puzzle. Did those accounts create the archetype, which Lazar then incorporated into his story? Or do they all describe the same reality? The timing matters. Lazar went public in 1989. By then, grey aliens were already part of UFO lore, popularized by books, television, and the Hill abduction case. A skeptic would argue he was simply drawing on existing cultural imagery to add credibility, but Lazar's description contained specific details that weren't part of mainstream imagery. The single central organ, for instance, or the integrated physiological structure. These aren't details you'd invent to make a story more believable. They're oddly specific, almost technical in nature. Either Lazar possessed a sophisticated understanding of how to create believable alien biology, or he was describing something he actually saw. The briefing materials, according to Lazar, contained more than just autopsy photos. There were reports on material analysis, propulsion theory, fragments of what might have been a historical timeline. Though without context, it was difficult to determine if this history referred to the beings, civilization, or their interactions with Earth. He mentions reading approximately 120 separate briefings, each covering different aspects of the program. Some detailed work being done by other teams, metallurgists analyzing the craft's hull materials, for instance, or engineers examining the waveguide systems. Others provided background information, including the alleged origin of the craft and whatever contextual information the program directors deemed relevant. This compartmentalization is consistent with how highly classified military programs operate. Each team knows only what's necessary for their specific task. It prevents any single person from having complete understanding of the project, limits the damage if information leaks, and maintains operational security. If Lazar's account is true, he was one piece of a much larger puzzle, a puzzle that potentially involved dozens or hundreds of people across multiple facilities, each working on fragments of an impossible technology. But if that's the case, where are the others? Why haven't more people come forward? Fear is a powerful motivator for silence. Lazar described threats, intimidation, harassment of friends and colleagues. Security clearances at this level come with severe penalties for disclosure, criminal prosecution, financial retracting wedded CHAPTR 6. The autopsy photographs continued ruin. Even the possibility of disappearing into the legal labyrinth of national security courts where proceedings are classified and defendants have limited rights. There's also the career consideration. Anyone working in classified programs has invested years building security clearances, establishing professional reputations within the defense and scientific communities. Coming forward means destroying that investment, becoming unemployable in your field, being branded as unreliable or worse, and perhaps, most significantly, many people who work on classified programs genuinely believe in the necessity of secrecy. They've been trained to compartmentalize, to accept that some knowledge must be protected for the greater good. The psychological conditioning runs deep. Lazar himself claimed he only came forward after a series of personal and professional crises left him feeling he had nothing more to lose. His marriage was failing. His security clearance had been suspended. He felt his life might be in danger, and going public was a form of insurance, making himself too visible to disappear quietly. But back to those photographs. If they were real, they represent perhaps the most profound evidence of non-human intelligence ever documented. Not lights in the sky, not ambiguous radar tracks, but physical, biological, remains of beings from elsewhere. The implications would cascade through every field of human knowledge. Biology would need to explain convergent evolution producing humanoid forms on different worlds, or consider the possibility of common origin. Physics would confront technologies that our current models can't explain. Philosophy and religion would grapple with humanity's place in a populated cosmos. And yet, if such evidence exists, it remains locked away, seen by perhaps a few hundred people over several decades, while the rest of humanity continues in ignorance. Is that sustainable? Can such a secret be kept indefinitely? History suggests otherwise. The Manhattan Project, perhaps the most successful classified program in history, employed over 130,000 people and remained secret for only a few years, before the atomic bomb's existence became undeniable. Stealth aircraft programs leaked details long before official acknowledgement. Human beings are not naturally suited to keeping secrets, especially secrets of tremendous significance, and yet, here we are, decades after Roswell, decades after Lazar's initial disclosures, and the government has never officially confirmed the existence of recovered alien technology. Either the secret-keeping apparatus is more effective than we imagine, or there's no secret to keep, unless the recent changes tell a different story. Chapter 7. The Shifting Official, unarrayed for most of the 20th century. The official position of the United States government regarding unidentified flying objects was dismissive at best, hostile at worst. Project Blue Book, the Air Force's official UFO investigation program, concluded in 1969 that no UFO sighting had ever represented a threat to national security or demonstrated technology beyond contemporary science. Case closed. Phenomena explained. Nothing to see here, but in recent years, something has changed. In 2017, the New York Times published a bombshell article revealing the existence of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, a Pentagon initiative that had quietly investigated UFO encounters, particularly those involving military personnel. The article included video footage released by the Department of Defense, showing objects performing maneuvers that defied explanation. These weren't grainy amateur recordings. These were censored data from advanced military aircraft, showing objects that accelerated from hover to supersonic speeds instantly, rotated without changing direction of travel, and demonstrated flight characteristics that no known aircraft could match. The Pentagon didn't dismiss these incidents. Officials acknowledged they couldn't explain them. In 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a preliminary assessment on unidentified aerial phenomena, the government's new term for UFOs. The report examined 144 incidents reported by military aviators. Of those, 143 remained unexplained. The report acknowledged that some objects appeared to demonstrate advanced technology and represented a potential threat to flight safety and national security. Then, in 2023, a military intelligence officer testified before Congress that the United States government has retrieved craft of non-human origin and has been running a decades-long reverse engineering program. He claimed knowledge of this through his role in special access programs, though he couldn't provide specific evidence in unclassified settings. These are not fringe claims from conspiracy theorists. These are official government documents and sworn testimony from credentialed military and intelligence personnel. Does this vindicate Bob Lazar? Not necessarily, but it demonstrates that the subject he discussed in 1989 when it was career suicide to take UFOs seriously, is now being addressed at the highest levels of government and media. The cultural shift is remarkable. UFOs have moved from tabloid fodder to congressional hearings. The stigma that once silenced witnesses is slowly eroding. Scientists who once refused to touch the subject are now openly calling for rigorous investigation. What changed? Why now? One possibility: the proliferation of sensors has made the phenomenon undeniable. Every smartphone has a camera. Military aircraft have multiple recording systems. Satellites watch vast swaths of the planet continuously. If unusual aerial objects are operating in our airspace, we're more likely to detect and document them than ever before. Another possibility: the technology gap has narrowed enough that adversaries might possess capabilities we previously thought impossible. China and Russia have made tremendous advances in hypersonics, drone technology, and electronic warfare. Some UFO incidents might involve foreign technology, and that would represent a serious national security concern. Or perhaps, and this is where we venture into speculation, there's a controlled disclosure underway, a gradual process of preparing the public for revelations that would have caused panic or disbelief if revealed suddenly. If you possessed proof of non-human intelligence and had kept it secret for decades, how would you eventually reveal it? You couldn't simply announce it in a press conference. The shock would be too great. Trust in institutions is already fragile. Admitting to decades of deception could shatter what remains. Instead, you'd leak information gradually, release videos that raise questions, allow credible witnesses to testify, create a slow drip of disclosure that normalizes the topic before making any definitive statements. Whether this interpretation is correct, the contrast with Lazar's era is striking. When he first went public in 1989, appearing on Las Vegas television with investigative reporter George Knapp, the response was mockery mixed with fascination. He was either a brilliant whistleblower or an elaborate fraud, depending on who you asked. The mainstream scientific community dismissed him entirely. His claims about element 115, gravitational propulsion, and recovered alien craft were considered so far beyond credibility that engaging with them would damage professional reputations. Today, physicists discuss Alcubierre drives in peer-reviewed journals. NASA has funded preliminary research into warp drive concepts. The possibility of gravitational propulsion is no longer science fiction. It's speculative, but legitimate physics. Lazar was either extraordinarily prescient, picking concepts that would later gain scientific legitimacy, or he was telling the truth about working on technology that operates on principles. We're only now beginning to theoretically explore, but even with shifting official narratives, one element of Lazar's story remains controversial and problematic: his educational credentials. Chapter 8: The Mystery of the Missing RECORD SBOB. Lazar claims to have studied physics at MIT and Caltech, two of the world's premier scientific institutions. These credentials would provide the expertise necessary for the work. He described at S4, "There's just one problem. Neither institution has any record of his attendance. This absence of documentation is, for many skeptics, the smoking gun that proves Lazar fabricated his entire story." Universities maintain meticulous records. Alumni associations track former students. Yearbooks, class rosters, thesis archives, all of these should contain evidence of Lazar's presence if he actually attended. They don't. Lazar's explanation is that his records were erased as part of a government effort to discredit him after he went public. It sounds like a convenient excuse, the classic conspiracy theorists' response when evidence doesn't support their claims. But here's where things get complicated. There is evidence that Lazar worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory. A 1982 phone directory from the lab includes his name. A local newspaper article from that era shows him with a jet-powered car, identifying him as a physicist at Los Alamos. Former colleagues have confirmed working with him there. Los Alamos doesn't hire random people off the street. Positions there require significant technical expertise and security clearances. If Lazar worked there, he must have possessed credentials convincing enough to satisfy their human resources department, yet MIT and Caltech maintain they have no records of him. Some investigators have suggested he may have taken classes at satellite campuses or extension programs, rather than being formally enrolled in degree programs. Others propose he exaggerated community college coursework into more prestigious credentials. Lazar himself has been vague about specifics, which doesn't help his credibility. But there's another angle worth considering. The government's historical pattern of manipulating records. During the Cold War, the CIA and other intelligence agencies routinely created false backgrounds for operatives and assets. People were given entirely fabricated histories, complete with paper trails, establishing fake identities. If agencies could create records from nothing, could they also erase them? The Church Committee investigations in the 1970s revealed that the CIA had conducted domestic surveillance operations, infiltrated media organizations, and manipulated public perception on a scale that shocked even cynical observers. These weren't conspiracy theories. They were documented facts, eventually declassified and admitted. If national security apparatus wanted to discredit someone who had leaked classified information, destroying their educational records would be an effective approach. It wouldn't just question their credibility, it would retroactively invalidate their expertise, making everything they claimed seem like the fantasy of an unqualified pretender. The counter-argument is that such erasure would require cooperation from multiple institutions, each with independent record-keeping systems, alumni networks, and countless people who would remember a classmate or student. The logistics seem daunting, unless compartmentalization operated there too. Maybe only a few registrar employees at each institution would need to be involved, perhaps without even knowing why certain records were being sealed or removed. We're speculating now, venturing into territory where evidence thins and possibility multiplies. This is the frustrating nature of the Lazar story. For every detail that seems to support his account, there's a contradiction or absence that undermines it. What we can say with certainty is that something doesn't add up. Either Lazar has been lying about his education for decades, maintaining a fraud that requires him to possess technical knowledge he shouldn't have without that education, or something unusual happened to his records. There's also his scientific knowledge to consider. Lazar has demonstrated understanding of physics, electronics, and engineering in numerous interviews and public appearances. He's built working particle accelerators, operates a scientific supply company, and speaks fluently about complex concepts. Skeptics argue this knowledge could be self-taught or acquired through less prestigious educational paths, and their right formal degrees aren't the only route to expertise. But would self-taught knowledge be sufficient to earn a position at Los Alamos National Laboratory? Would it convince whoever recruited him for the S4 program These questions don't have simple answers. What we're left with is a man whose credentials can't be fully verified, whose claims can't be proven, but whose story contains enough technical detail and internal consistency to prevent easy dismissal. It's maddening for anyone seeking definitive answers, but perhaps the most telling aspect of Lazar's account isn't what he said, but what he didn't say. Chapter 9. The Things He Didn't See. Lim. Here's something interesting about Bob Lazar's narrative. It's remarkably restrained. Consider what he could have claimed. He could have said he flew in the alien craft, experiencing interstellar travel firsthand. He could have described meetings with extraterrestrial beings, conversations about their civilization and intentions. He could have claimed extensive knowledge of their history, their technology, their plans for Earth. He claimed none of these things. Instead, his account is limited to what he says he personally witnessed and worked on. He saw craft. He worked on understanding their propulsion systems. He read briefing documents that provided minimal context. He saw 2 autopsy photographs, but never encountered actual beings. When asked about subjects beyond his direct experience, whether the beings pose a threat, what their society might be like, why they're here, he consistently responds with phrases like, "I don't know, that's speculation," or "I can only speak to what I worked on." This restraint is unusual. Most hoaxers, given a platform and an audience, tend to elaborate, adding details to make their stories more compelling. The temptation to claim greater knowledge, more dramatic experiences, is powerful. Lazar resists it. His descriptions remain confined to the technical aspects of the propulsion system, the limited interior of the craft he examined, and the fragments of information he gleaned from briefing materials. He's also remarkably willing to express doubt about topics adjacent to his claims. When asked about alien abductions, a phenomenon embraced by much of the UFO community, he says he doesn't believe most accounts. Despite claiming to have worked on alien technology, he's skeptical about stories of humans being taken aboard craft. This creates a strange position. He's asking people to believe an extraordinary claim while simultaneously rejecting other extraordinary claims in the same general category. Why would a hoaxer do that? If you're fabricating a story, wouldn't you want to align with the broader believing community, validating their experiences to gain their support? Unless he's not fabricating. Unless he's simply being honest about the limits of his knowledge and his personal skepticism about claims he can't verify. There's also what he says about the beings themselves. His speculation about Earth being like Disneyland. To them, an interesting place to observe, but not interact with, is almost dismissive. It doesn't paint aliens as saviors or threats, as benevolent space brothers or sinister invaders. It renders them almost mundane, tourists or researchers with no particular agenda. Regarding humanity, this isn't the narrative of either extreme believers or fearmongers. It's something more ambivalent, more uncertain. Similarly, his comments about governments keeping the secret don't invoke malevolent cabals or shadow organizations. He suggests bureaucratic inertia, legitimate national security concerns, and the simple problem of admitting decades of deception. His reasoning is pragmatic rather than paranoid. Even his personal story is messy in ways that fictional accounts rarely are. The reason he left the program wasn't dramatic. No assassination attempts, no dramatic escape. It was banal, marital problems, security concerns about his emotional stability, and then getting caught bringing friends to witness test flights. If you were creating a story, Would you include the detail about your wife's affair being monitored by security personnel? Would you admit to violating security protocols by bringing unauthorized witnesses to secret test flights? These details make Lazar look imperfect, questionable in judgment. All too human, they also make his account more believable to some listeners, because real life is messy. Real people make poor decisions. Real situations spiral out of control through cascading mistakes rather than singular dramatic events. None of this proves Lazar's account is true, but it demonstrates that his approach to telling it doesn't follow the patterns of typical hoaxers or attention seekers. He's not selling salvation or promoting fear. He's not claiming special status or unique importance. He describes himself as someone who happened to be in the right place at the right time, recruited for reasons he doesn't fully understand, working on a project he couldn't complete, and after telling his story, he largely withdrew from public life. He runs a scientific supply business in Michigan now, occasionally gives interviews when pressed, but doesn't tour the UFO conference circuit, doesn't sell products based on his claims, doesn't leverage his story for maximum profit. Again, why not? If this were a long-term hoax, why not monetize it more aggressively? The frustrating truth is that every piece of evidence that seems to support Lazar can be explained away, and every contradiction can be rationalized. We're left in a state of uncertainty, unable to prove or disprove the core claims. Which brings us to perhaps the most important question: does it matter? Chapter 10. The weight of IMP-LICI-TON. Just for a moment, that Lazar's account is entirely accurate. That somewhere in the Nevada desert, the United States government has maintained a program studying recovered alien technology for decades. What would that mean? First, the obvious. We are not alone. Intelligent life exists elsewhere in the universe, has developed technology far surpassing ours, and has visited Earth. This alone would represent the most significant revelation in human history, but the implications extend far beyond that simple statement. It would mean that the technology gap between human civilization and at least one other intelligent species is vast. The gulf between modern fighter jets and gravitational propulsion would be similar to the gap between stone tools and spacecraft. We would be, in cosmic terms, primitives, capable of basic technological achievements, but nowhere near the cutting edge of what's possible. This would force a fundamental reassessment of human exceptionalism. We've spent centuries placing ourselves at the center of significance, first believing Earth was the center of the universe, then that our sun was unique, then that intelligence was rare. Each time, we've been proven wrong. We orbit an ordinary star in an ordinary galaxy, one of billions. If aliens exist and visit Earth, we're not even the most advanced intelligence in our own neighborhood. That realization would be psychologically difficult for many people to accept. There's also the question of timing. If these beings have been visiting for thousands of years, as ancient artworks and texts might suggest, they've witnessed our entire recorded history. They've watched empires rise and fall, seen us develop language, art, science, and technology. They've observed our wars, our achievements, our follies. What conclusions might they draw about us? Lazar's speculation that we're like Disneyland to them, interesting but not worthy of direct interaction, is humbling. We like to imagine that first contact would be a momentous meeting of equals, a Star Trek scenario where different civilizations exchange knowledge and culture. But what if we're not interesting enough for that? What if our technology is too primitive, our society too unstable, our understanding too limited. We don't typically negotiate with ant colonies, not because we're hostile to ants, but because meaningful communication is impossible. Then there's the question of why governments would keep this secret. Lazar's explanation touches on legitimate concerns: weapon potential, technological advantage, avoiding panic, the difficulty of admitting decades of deception. But there might be darker reasons. Control over such technology would represent unprecedented power. The nation that masters gravitational propulsion first doesn't just win the next war. It achieves dominance so complete that conflict becomes meaningless. You could be anywhere instantly. You could access resources throughout the solar system. You could render all conventional military power obsolete. That's not just a strategic advantage. It's a fundamental reshaping of global power dynamics. Small wonder, then, if such knowledge is guarded obsessively, there's also the societal impact to consider. Our entire economy is built on certain assumptions about energy, transportation, and resource scarcity. If gravitational propulsion and matter-antimatter reactors are possible, those assumptions evaporate. Fossil fuels become obsolete overnight. Entire industries collapse. Geopolitical alliances based on resource control become irrelevant. The economic disruption would be catastrophic unless carefully managed. Perhaps that's another reason for secrecy, not to hide the existence of aliens, but to prevent the economic chaos that would follow if their technology were revealed before we're ready to implement it, without causing societal collapse. And then there's the most unsettling possibility. What if the beings who built these craft have no interest in helping us understand their technology? What if they've placed limits on what can be learned, either through the design of the craft themselves or through direct communication with human governments? Imagine being handed a computer by someone from the 1800s and asked to explain exactly how it works. Even if you're willing to help, where do you start? How do you convey concepts like semiconductors, binary logic, and electromagnetic radiation to someone whose frame of reference is steam engines and telegraphs? Now reverse that scenario. Imagine beings whose science is centuries or millennia ahead of ours, trying to explain their technology. The gap might be so vast that meaningful transfer of knowledge is impossible. Regardless of good intentions, Lazar's account suggests exactly this frustration. Teams of intelligent scientists confronting technology they can barely measure, let alone understand or reproduce. They might spend decades and make only incremental progress. But even if progress is slow, the implications remain staggering. Because if the craft exists, if the technology is real, then everything changes eventually. The question is not whether humanity will achieve these capabilities, but when and under what circumstances. Will it be through slow, painful reverse engineering, each generation making slight advances? Will it be through sudden breakthrough, some insight that unlocks the principles and allows rapid development? Or will it be through direct intervention, the beings themselves deciding we're ready for contact and technological exchange? We don't know. We can't know unless and until disclosure happens. Which brings us back to where we started. One man's account. Impossible to fully verify or debunk. Describing events that would reshape human understanding if true. Chapter 11. The pattern of WITNS. Bob Lazar is not alone. He's simply the most prominent of a long line of individuals who have come forward claiming knowledge of government programs involving recovered alien technology. Some of these witnesses are icily dismissed, people with no verifiable credentials making outlandish claims, but others present more complicated cases. There's Philip Corso, a former army officer who claimed in his book The Day After Roswell that he helped distribute alien technology recovered from the 1947 Roswell incident to private contractors, seeding American industry with concepts that led to integrated circuits, fiber optics, and night vision equipment. Skeptics note numerous factual errors in Corso's book and question his credibility. But he was a decorated military officer with documented service in intelligence. His claims can't be easily dismissed as the ravings of someone with no insider knowledge. There's Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo 14 astronaut who walked on the moon, who stated publicly that he'd been briefed by military and intelligence personnel about recovered alien craft and believed the government had evidence of extraterrestrial visitation. Mitchell never claimed first-hand knowledge of these programs, only that trusted sources had shared information with him. But he was willing to stake his considerable reputation on these claims. There are the recent congressional testimonies from intelligence and military personnel describing unidentified aerial phenomena that demonstrate technologies far beyond current human capabilities. These witnesses spoke under oath with legal penalties for lying to Congress. The pattern is intriguing. Across decades, individuals with military, intelligence, or scientific backgrounds have made similar claims. The details vary, sometimes contradicting each other, but the core narrative remains consistent. Someone recovered something. Someone is studying it, and the truth is being concealed. Either this represents a coordinated disinformation campaign using credible witnesses to spread deliberate falsehoods for purposes we can only guess at, or it reflects a genuine phenomenon that multiple people have encountered. The disinformation theory has merit. Intelligence agencies have used exactly this tactic in other contexts, spreading false information to confuse adversaries or distract from actual classified programs. During the Cold War, UFO reports were sometimes encouraged because they provided cover for secret aircraft testing. But would such a campaign continue for over 70 years? Would it involve dozens of witnesses, including people with little to gain and much to lose by coming forward? The logistical complexity seems overwhelming. There's also the international aspect. Similar claims have emerged from other countries: Russia, France, Brazil, Chile. All have had military or government personnel describe encounters with unexplained aerial phenomena or suggest official knowledge of something extraordinary. If this is disinformation, it's a global effort. Possible, certainly, but increasingly elaborate to maintain. The alternative, that something genuine is being observed and studied, that the witnesses are telling the truth as they understand it, creates its own problems. Because if the phenomenon is real, why has no incontrovertible evidence emerged? Why do we still rely on testimony rather than having physical proof? Lazar's answer would be that evidence is tightly controlled, that nothing leaves secure facilities, that the classified apparatus is more effective than outsiders imagine. And history does show that governments can keep secrets when sufficiently motivated, but there's a limit to how long such secrets remain secure. Eventually, documentation emerges, whistleblowers provide proof, or the phenomenon becomes so widely observed that denial becomes impossible. We may be approaching that point. The recent shift in official acknowledgement, the congressional hearings, the declassified videos, these suggest cracks in whatever walls of secrecy exist, or they're a controlled release of information that ultimately leads nowhere, satisfying public curiosity while revealing nothing substantive. We circle back again and again to uncertainty. And perhaps that's the point. Perhaps the true secret isn't the existence of alien technology, but the deliberately maintained ambiguity that prevents anyone from knowing for certain what's real. Chapter 12. The science of the IMPO's size-by. Let's set aside the question of whether Lazar's account is true and examine something more fundamental. Is what he described even possible? Does the technology he detailed violate known physics, or does it simply extend principles we already understand? Start with element 115 and antimatter reactors. As discussed earlier, element 115 exists. We've created it in laboratories. It's unstable, but the concept of an island of stability where superheavy elements become long-lived is legitimate physics. We haven't found such isotopes, but theoretical models predict they could exist. Antimatter reactions are real. When matter and antimatter meet, they annihilate completely, converting mass directly into energy according to Einstein's equation. The efficiency is indeed close to 100%. We produce tiny amounts of antimatter in particle accelerators and have even briefly contained antihydrogen. The engineering challenges of building a reactor that uses antimatter as an energy source are enormous: containing antimatter, directing the reaction, managing the energy output, but nothing in the concept violates physical laws. Now consider gravitational propulsion. Here we enter more speculative territory. We know gravity exists. We can describe its effects mathematically with extraordinary precision, but we don't fully understand its mechanism at the quantum level. Attempts to unify gravity with quantum mechanics, the holy grail of theoretical physics, remain incomplete. But we do know that gravity is a curvature of space-time caused by massive objects bend space around them, and objects move along these curves, which we perceive as gravitational attraction. Could a device generate gravitational fields without having massive amounts of mass? Current physics says no. But current physics is incomplete. The standard model of particle physics doesn't include gravity. String theory and other attempts at a theory of everything suggests possibilities we haven't fully explored. The Alcubierre drive, again, demonstrates that faster-than-light travel doesn't violate relativity. If you're manipulating space-time itself rather than moving through it, the mathematics work. The problem is the requirement for exotic matter with negative energy density, something we've never observed and don't know how to create, unless, as Lazar suggested, element 115 in certain configurations produces exactly this kind of exotic gravitational effect. That would be a property unlike anything in known physics, but not necessarily impossible, just undiscovered. Think about the history of physics. Before Maxwell's equations, electromagnetic radiation was mysterious. Before Einstein, space and time were thought to be absolute. Before quantum mechanics, the behavior of particles at atomic scales was inexplicable. Each major advance in physics revealed phenomena that would have seemed impossible before the underlying principles were understood. What seems impossible today might simply reflect the limits of current knowledge. Lazar also described the craft operating differently in atmosphere versus space. In atmosphere, the gravitational field ionizes surrounding air, creating the characteristic glow witnesses report. In space, without air to ionize, the craft would be much less visible. This makes physical sense. High-energy fields interacting with atmospheric gases would indeed produce ionization and luminescence. The color changes with power levels also align with the physics of plasma. Different temperatures and energy states produce different wavelengths of light. The maneuverability he described, instantaneous acceleration, right-angle turns, would be possible if the craft isn't pushing against surrounding medium, but rather manipulating space-time. There would be no GI forces inside because the craft and everything in it moves together through distorted space. From the crew's perspective, they're stationary. It's the universe moving around them. Even the seamless construction Lazar described isn't beyond possibility. Advanced additive manufacturing can create complex shapes without traditional fasteners or welds. We don't currently have the precision he described. But the concept isn't physically impossible. The low ceilings, small seats, and compact design all suggest engineering optimized for efficiency rather than human comfort. If you're designing for beings 3 to 4 feet tall, you can reduce mass, save energy, and improve performance. Basic engineering trade-offs that any competent designer would make. So here's the unsettling conclusion: nothing Lazar described is definitively impossible. It's far beyond current engineering capabilities, but it doesn't violate fundamental physical laws. It represents extremely advanced application of principles we partially understand, which means his account could be true. Or it means he crafted his story carefully, staying just inside the boundaries of theoretical possibility. While describing technology we can't build, we're left, once more, in that frustrating space between belief and skepticism. Epilogue: the untold words we've journeyed through deserts that hide secrets, examined technology that pushes the boundaries of physics, explored the implications of contact with intelligence beyond our own. We've weighed evidence and contradiction, considered possibilities both mundane and extraordinary. And where have we arrived? Not at certainty, not at proof, but perhaps at something more valuable, a sense of the profound mystery that remains at the heart of Bob Lazar's account. In that 1997 interview, speaking with casual technical precision, Lazar laid out a story that has occupied researchers, skeptics, and believers for over 3 decades. He described working on technology that shouldn't exist, encountered in a facility that can't be proven, under circumstances that defy verification. His words, some spoken, some implied, some deliberately left unsaid, paint a picture of a reality more complex and strange than our everyday experience acknowledges. A reality where boundaries we thought absolute might be permeable, where visitors from other worlds might observe us with a detached interest. We show wildlife in nature preserves. The untold words in Lazar's account aren't the things he failed to mention. They're the implications he left for us to discover ourselves, the questions about humanity's place in the cosmos, the uncomfortable possibility that we're neither as special nor as alone as we've believed, the recognition that there might be hierarchies of intelligence and technology in the universe, and we might not be at the top. These are thoughts that inspire both wonder and unease. Wonder at the vastness of possibility, unease at our relative insignificance. But perhaps the most important untold words are these: we don't have to have all the answers to ask the right questions. Science progresses not by certainty, but by honest inquiry, by admitting what we don't know, by examining phenomena that challenge our understanding, rather than dismissing them because they're uncomfortable. Whether Bob Lazar spent months reversing alien propulsion systems in a hidden Nevada facility, or crafted an elaborate fiction that happened to align with emerging physics concepts. Either way, his story has value. It reminds us that the universe is vast beyond comprehension, that our current understanding is necessarily incomplete, that somewhere out there, perhaps among the stars, visible from Zeta Reticuli, or perhaps in other galaxies billions of light-years away. There might be others looking up at their night sky and wondering the same questions we ask. Are we alone? Has anyone found us? What secrets might our governments keep? The Nevada desert keeps its secrets well. The facilities at Area 51 and beyond continue their classified work, whatever that work might be. Witnesses come forward and are either celebrated or dismissed. The pattern continues, and we're left with a choice: to believe or to doubt, to investigate or to dismiss, to remain open to possibility or to demand proof before entertaining extraordinary claims. There's no wrong answer. Both skepticism and wonder have their place. What matters is that we keep asking questions, keep examining evidence, keep pushing the boundaries of understanding, because whether or not Bob Lazar worked on alien spacecraft in the Nevada desert, the questions his account raises are real. The possibility of life elsewhere is real. The vastness of what we don't know is real. And somewhere in a desert that hides more than sand, beneath skies that have witnessed things we can barely imagine, those questions wait for answers. The untold words, the deepest secrets remain, for now.